Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a Friday evening, and we recognize that you could be doing so many other things, but you chose to be with us here tonight, so we don't take that for granted. I have the honor of welcoming you all, so welcome. My job is very easy tonight. My name is Penina Achayo-Laker, and I am an associate professor of communication design at Wheaton University in St. Louis. I'm also a faculty fellow and the associate director of the Carver project, which is a co-sponsor, I guess, in many ways of this event, this very special event that we have tonight on engaging politics as a follower of Jesus Christ. So the Carver project is a faculty-founded Christian organization at Wheaton University in St. Louis. Our mission is to empower Christian faculty and students to serve and connect university, church, and society. So we have several events and different kinds of programming that we do to connect the university, pretty much bridge the gap between the university, our society, and the church. Tonight's event is an example of how we strive to engage the university and the church. So our church partners, which One Family is one of about 13 church partners that we have, is an example of how we do that. We work in close partnership with our churches to identify topics or areas of interest and think about how we as faculty can either bring speakers or sometimes our very own faculty to come in creative dialogue with the body of Christ and how we can engage these topics, knowing that at the end of the day we are image bearers and we want to be good stewards of that. So we hope that tonight you get to enjoy this event. And if you're interested in learning more about the Carver project, you could also just visit carverstl.org. You can find out more about, we have an academic speaker series, which sometimes we host on WashU's campus or at churches as well, where we bring faculty, Christian faculty, engaging in different topics. We have Carver classrooms, we have a lot of different things. But tonight is, I'm very excited because we have some really great speakers for you. So I am going to pass it over to Pastor Brent Monroe, my pastor. This is my home church too, so it's a special night for me as well because it's nice that my home church gets to host one of these events. So I'm going to pass it over to Pastor Brent to officially welcome you all again, pray for us, and then get us going. So thank you for being here.
Well, welcome everyone. Dr. Penina Laker is just amazing, and it is such a joy and an honor to be introduced by you. I'm the lead pastor here at One Family Church, and we are partnering with the Carver Project to host this night. And our hope is that this night will be a night of inspiration, and it will be a night that you enjoy, and it will be a night that provides some insight and clarity about how to engage politics as followers of Jesus, especially in an age where a lot of people struggle to do it well. And so we want to learn from our guests tonight, and so I'm excited to have you all here. And that's all I'm going to say because my only job was to pray. That was my only job tonight. So would you bow your heads? Let's pray and get ready for the program. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to come together with other brothers and sisters in Christ to listen and think and consider how we might engage politics as followers of Jesus in ways that would honor you and glorify you, that others might see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. I just pray that each and every one of us here, Lord, our hearts would be open and soft for the working of your Spirit. We know that your Holy Spirit is here even now. And so we just thank you, we praise you, and we ask that everything that we do bring honor, praise, and glory to you. We pray all of this in the mighty name of your Son, Jesus. And everybody said, amen. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Shelley Milligan, the Managing Director of the Carver Project. She is going to take it over from here. Shelley Milligan, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to see all of you here, so many friends, and on a busy Friday night in the middle of the fall. I am just going to sort of set up this evening so that you know what to expect, and then I'll call forward our special guests. So the first part of the evening will actually be each of them speaking for 8 to 10 minutes, just a few comments that they have on this topic. At that point, the three of us will then have a brief discussion amongst ourselves while you all are thinking, maybe even now, about questions that you'd like to ask our panelists. And there's one way that you get those questions to me, and that is on your program. At the very bottom in the middle is a QR code. And I think that there actually is one up on the screen too. I don't know if that works, but if you've never used a QR code, you take your phone and pretend like you're gonna take a picture of that, and this little yellow, I think it'll be yellow, bar will show up at the bottom, and you just push that. And it'll take you to a very simple screen where you type your question on your phone, and then it magically gets to me. So I will, in real time, be monitoring those and then ask during the question and answer period your questions. So I'm just gonna say again, that part of the evening depends on you and what you would like to know, either right now, maybe something's hot on your heart. You can feel free to ask it already. You might be stimulated by something that's said from either of these folks, or whatever comes to your brain, but we want you to be part of this, and so this seems to be the easiest way and the most democratic to get everybody's questions up front. Does that make sense? Okay, so introductions can be very boring, and so I'm not gonna do that. You have this program, and I would love for you to read it if you haven't yet. The two people who are here tonight are really quite distinguished, and I'm really proud to be able to share them with you in conjunction with One Family Church. This is such a gift to me personally, but also for all of you. I'll tell you that Vince Bacote is actually on our board. He comes here, he flew in yesterday from Chicago. He teaches at Wheaton. He's a professor of theology and director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics. He also is a fellow tennis player, so you can ask him about that afterwards if you're interested. He's also quite an accomplished bowler, B-O-W-L-E-R, not to be confused with a baller, although maybe that's also applicable. And he plays a mean bass guitar. Michael Weir is also with us. He is the founder, president, and CEO of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he's held a number of positions, including in the White House under the Obama administration, working in issues of faith and civic life. So he's really a gift. He flew in literally landed 2 hours ago. So he's fresh off a plane here to be with us tonight. And he has an especial fondness for Italy and all things Italy, Italian food. So these are things you could engage with Michael about. After this event, Subterranean Books will be here. If you're interested in purchasing either books from either of these authors, they'll be for sale, and you can have them sign the books and take a couple minutes to speak with them. So that's the plan for the evening. If it's okay with you, I'll invite our guests up to the stage, and I think that Vince is our first speaker.
Good evening. It's great that you're all here on a Friday night. I know everybody keeps saying that, but it's not taken for granted. A question that I ask my students at least once a semester is this question: what discernible difference does being Christian make to your life? And especially when you leave Wheaton College, where you get this Christian liberal arts education, what difference is it going to make most of your week, especially when that week is not Sunday? It's that kind of question that I think is very vital when we're thinking about a question like engaging politics as a follower of Jesus. What discernible difference does being Christian actually make when it comes to engaging politics? When I'm asking that question, what I'm asking is, how do the things that you say you believe actually walk around with you, actually function in your life, actually show up in the way that you order your life, in the way you prioritize your life? And it's that same question when it comes to how is these things that you say you believe showing up, in this case of politics, how is that showing up there? Now, I am sometimes a naive idealist. And as the naive idealist, the way that I used to think that it could work was like this. Well, if people just could tell you a few things about what they believed, and if you ask them how those things function as a kind of lens for them when they look at politics, then it would just be so simple. These things that they believe, it would be a lens, they would see it, and it would just work. It would just work. But I wish it was that simple. It's actually more complicated than that. Here's the reason why I think it is especially complicated. When it comes to the way that we go about our lives, the way that we form our beliefs, the way that we perceive the world, the way that we respond to the world, the way that we value things in the world. You know, I tell people, everybody brings a suitcase, the suitcase of their life with them. A whole set of experiences, everything that has contributed to forming them into the person that they are. So even if they are a cradle Christian, the fact of the matter is that it's not just that Christian formation, at whatever depth it is, that Christian formation is not the only thing in that suitcase. There are a lot of other things in that suitcase. And part of the complication can be this. If you ask a Christian, hey, how's your faith influencing your politics? They might tell you that some belief is actually directing their thoughts. But a question that I've begun to ask is this. Okay, let's ask this question first. Number one, how did you learn to put together faith and politics? How do you do that? Where did it come from? Can you identify what that formation is? Then I want to know, okay, well, who told you about that formation? What are your actual influences? Can you name those influences? Can you identify specific beliefs? And then the thing I really am trying to get at with people when I'm asking them that question is, can you talk about all the other stuff that was around when you were forming that way of thinking about faith and politics? Because the fact of the matter is that we don't just believe what we believe as Christians. We believe a lot of other things. And sometimes what happens is those other beliefs function as what some people call control beliefs. Control beliefs are beliefs that are very prominent, very formative, and basically they vie for calling the shots. But here's the interesting thing. So if you ask a Christian about how their faith functions in their politics, and they might even tell you what a belief is, the question that really has to be asked now is, can you identify the other beliefs that are vying for control? Because if you don't vie for them, if you don't think about them, and if you're not aware of them, then they kind of have free reign. And they may be calling the shots, and what people think is their faith informing their politics may instead be their faith sponsoring their control beliefs. And everybody needs to be asking that question. What are your other control beliefs? Because If you don't ask that question, it's got free rein because it's not being asked any questions. It's just doing what it does, operating and actually sometimes vying to be the thing that controls. And when that happens, our faith sponsors the control belief, right? And the control belief calls the shots. And so we have to be willing to ask that. Now, here's the interesting thing about engaging faith in politics in the moment that we're in that makes it even further complicated. So, use that lens metaphor I'm talking about. If I say I've got a doctrine of some kind, that's my lens, and to say this card is politics, I'm looking at politics, and when I'm thinking about faith, I'm thinking about, okay, that's my religious commitment. Here's the problem. We are in an era now where people's political commitments are functioning for them like religious commitments. It is giving them meaning. It is giving them purpose. It is telling them what is most important. It is what people are looking to put their trust. They're looking to it to bring them a sense of peace and wholeness. And so if you're looking through the lens of your Christian faith, the question is, do you know whether your politics is also functioning as an alternative form of faith? Or is your Christian faith able to interrogate this other thing that might be functioning as another form of faith itself? This is very, very important. Now, please understand, when I ask those questions because I do think it's possible for Christians to really be people for whom their faith, these things that they say they believe, does make a discernible difference in the way that they look at politics. But in order for that to happen, there has to be intentionality for that to happen. And part of that intentionality includes being able to recognize, okay, how do these things that I say I believe operate for me? Now, because I'm out of time almost, I'm just going to give you a very simple version of how that might work. Let's just use Jesus as an example. People are always talking about Jesus. Okay, so you say Jesus is Lord. Great. Here's the next question. Is that really true? And if it's really true, does what you believe about Jesus determine your politics? Or is he there either just hanging around and when you need him, you bring him? Or do you want him to sponsor other things? Can he be the one that is always questioning your commitments? If you really say that he's Lord. If you really say he's a king, is he really the one that you trust more than anything else? And so much more than anything else that no matter what's going on, you refuse to be pulled in to all the temptations to think that whatever's happening in history, even God can't handle it. If we say that Jesus is risen from the dead, he's Lord of all, he's our king, and again, this is just one example. There are a lot of different beliefs, but this is one example. What difference will that make? And imagine this, and I'll sit down after this. Imagine this. What if it was really true and obvious that of all the people that named the name of Christ, everybody knew who was really number one?
Well, I'm just really pleased to be back here, and as the person speaking, counter to Vince, I'm here to argue that in fact it is all really simple, and so I was going to argue that in 3 points, but actually it just requires one. No. Look, a few years ago, I received a call from a friend who I work with on an array of issues. I think probably when we vote, we're not voting in the same way most of the time, but I work with this friend on human rights issues, international religious freedom. I know her to be a faithful follower of Jesus. And usually when she calls me, she is calling because there's a human rights crisis somewhere. And she says, Michael, can we get together a statement? We need to pull together a meeting, got to do something. But a few years ago, she reached out with a very different kind of message. She called me, and when I picked up, she said, Michael, I know this is a little out of the blue, but I was hoping you might find the time to meet with my daughter. She's been deeply troubled by what's happening in our politics. And while I've tried to explain it, she just doesn't understand how the work that I do matches up with the values that I and her father raised her with. She's just started, she's in college now. She's no longer going to church. And she's disenchanted. And my friend said, Michael, I was hoping you'd spend some time with her. I want her to meet with a faithful Christian who just has a different approach to politics than I do. And then this is the line that got me. She said, Michael, to be honest, I no longer care all that much about the future of my daughter's politics. I just want her to start going to church with her family again. Now, oddly, perhaps this conversation was one of the most hopeful I've had in recent years. Here was someone who'd invested their professional life in political advocacy, who nonetheless was willing to set aside their politics out of love for their daughter. And there are people in our churches who are waiting for someone to say the same thing to them. And how many of us would do the same? How many of us would say we'd prefer to lose in our political ambitions if it meant others might draw closer to Jesus? How many of us would say we'd prefer to sacrifice political advantage if it meant we might draw nearer to Jesus? It is a hard thing to have people in your life whose desire to make their point seems greater than their desire for you to draw nearer to Jesus. In his essay, Membership, C.S. Lewis writes, a sick society must think much about politics as a sick man must think much about his digestion. However, if either comes to regard it as the natural food of the mind, if either forgets that we think of such things only in order to be able to think of something else, then what was undertaken for the sake of health has become itself a new and deadly disease. Our culture and many people in our churches are sick with that new and deadly disease. Politics is causing great spiritual harm in Americans' lives, and a big reason for that is that many Americans are going to politics to get their spiritual needs met. In October 2020, 15 scholars came out with a framework for thinking about the kind of polarization we have today. They called it political sectarianism. Political sectarianism is, quote, the tendency to adopt a moralized identification with one political group and against another. It's upheld by three pillars. The scholars said it's a toxic cocktail made up of three primary ingredients. The first is the tendency of othering, which is the tendency to view those who disagree with you politically as essentially different or alien to oneself. Second is the tendency of aversion, which is the tendency to dislike and distrust opposing partisans. And then finally is the tendency of moralization, which is the tendency to view opposing partisans, and it's interesting they use this term, moralization is the tendency to view opposing partisans as iniquitous, as opposed to merely wrong-headed. Now, what does political life look like when it runs on the fuel of aversion, othering, and a misplaced moralization? The scholars wrote, out-party hate has become more powerful than in-party love as a predictor of voting behavior. In other words, political hatred has become so profound that it outstrips many individuals' desire to actually help themselves, not to mention loftier motivations like pursuing the common good. Political sectarianism is a state in which we hate our opponents so much we'll do harm to ourselves and our interests before we concede anything to them. Now, the challenges in our politics are not systemic to the exclusion of the personal and individual. Instead, many of our most profound political problems reflect how our political institutions process and respond to the habits of heart that are held fundamentally at the level of the individual. These habits are acted on at all levels of human life, including at the level of personal relationships, the immediate community, and our broader political and public life. We are in a vicious feedback loop of a citizenry that makes itself available for and incentivizes political tactics that degrade people and degrade our politics, which leads to a normalization, a kind of embeddedness of these kinds of political tactics and approaches. My book, The Spirit of Our Politics, is grounded in the conviction that the kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics we have. And therefore, spiritual formation is central to civic renewal. We cannot separate out the kind of politics we have, our laws, our political leaders and institutions, our political culture, from the kind of people we are. Our politics is doing great harm materially and spiritually, and if that is to change, it's vital that we recognize the ways in which our politics is ours. The state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls. If we were a different kind of people, our politics would be different. You are not one person in politics and another person in your personal life. You're just you. Thoughts, feelings, and actions that are characteristic for a person when they are dealing with politics are not somehow quarantined off from the rest of the person. If you are the kind of person who lies during political arguments to get your way, you are the kind of person who lies during political arguments to get your way. If you are the kind of person who wishes ill to fall upon those you disagree with politically, you are that kind of person. These are the kind of searing insights that make me the author and intellectual that I am. Just groundbreaking stuff. So what kind of person are you? This is the question. Not just when it comes to politics, but when it comes to life with Jesus. Dallas Willard defined joy as a pervasive and constant sense of well-being. And at my events over the last several years, I've been asking folks, how many of you would define our politics as full of a pervasive and constant sense of well-being? And of course, it's a laugh line. But might it be a problem that so many of us don't see politics as a place for joy? Where else do we think the way of Jesus isn't quite realistic? Our society, politics, and churches are hampered by a technological conceit that we can attain the kind of society we seek without coming to terms with the kind of people we are and without becoming a different kind of people. But societal change, real lasting societal change, is not possible without coming to terms with the nature of the problem. And so C.S. Lewis describes in Mere Christianity how thinking of politics leads quite naturally to thinking about formation. He writes, a Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it. And we're not going to really want it until we become fully Christian. I may repeat, do as you would be done by till I'm blue in the face. But I cannot really carry it out till I love my neighbor as myself. And I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God. And I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey him. And so, as I warned you, we are driven on to something more inward, driven on from social matters to religious matters. T.S. Eliot once described the folly of the human endeavor as seeking to find a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. I think that summarizes so much of our political life. Seeking to find a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. That we could just have goodness imposed on us so that we don't have to be good ourselves. Now, this is the beauty and the weakness of democracy. Our democracy can't quite get around the kind of people we are. As Christians, we care about politics because we care about our neighbors and our communities. And political decisions impact our neighbors' well-being. As a citizen, you do not choose to have political influence, you already have it. Therefore, sitting out of politics does not absolve you of blame for the state of our politics. Your sitting out is your choice about how to steward the responsibility you've been given. Politics is one of the essential forms in which we can love our neighbor. Now, to love our neighbor is to will their good. And this is what drives Christians to politics. We don't go to politics to seek affirmation or as a primary source of identity. Christians go to politics to affirm human dignity and advance justice. Our spiritual and emotional needs are met elsewhere. As Christians who seek to follow Jesus, we seek to do in politics what we do with all of our lives, which is to place that which is within the range of our effective will, under and within the will of God. We want to place all that we have a say over under the jurisdiction of love. We want to act in the knowledge of the glory of God and in light of who God is and what he thinks about those he has made. What our politics needs most, we have in Jesus. I was absolutely struck, and I'll close with this. I was absolutely struck by this finding. In 1951, Benjamin Mays, that towering figure of the 20th century, intellectual preacher, longtime president of Morehouse, went to Riverside Church in New York. And his sermon at Riverside Church was covered in the New York Times, not as like a religious curiosity, but as news, because he was viewed as someone who had knowledge to offer to the public, for the public good. And he said this incredible thing. He said, it isn't more light we need. It isn't more truth. And it isn't more scientific data. It is more Christ, more courage, more spiritual insight to act on the light we have. We are in a political season that is rife with grand claims and destructive manipulation. And there is much that might obscure our vision. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the bright one. Go to Jesus with your heart. And then go out with Jesus at your side, out into the world, out into our politics, as a blessing to those you come across, for the good of the public and for the glory of God. And I look forward to discussing more of these ideas with you and with my friends this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great thoughts to start with. You know, I'm struck with the fact that both of you talked about how we as a society and as people and as Christians go to politics for our meaning, for peace, for belonging, for identification, and that politics and our political commitment trumps our faith commitment. And so my first question is, why? Why do we do that? Why? Is it because there's an election for president this year? Is it because it's easier to find tangible community with a political party? Why? Why do we do that?
Earlier this week, we had a lecture with Molly Yorthen on campus at Wheaton, and she's doing a book about people that are guru figures. And she's basically saying that those are figures that, I mean, it's vexing to people who don't understand who the guru is, but for the people who are with the guru, this is the person. There's some narrative that they give you that it really is speaking to a spiritual hunger that people have. And part of what she was observing was that in the way that politics is functioning as a religious type of identity for people, there's a narrative that includes politics that is functioning that way. And if you're getting a particular narrative from a particular guru or a group associated with such a figure, then for a lot of people, that's drawing them. And I think another way to think about it is that Jesus is 2,000 years ago, right? And so people do not see him, right? But they do see someone on television. And so there's something about, I think also, the closeness of the person giving you this narrative as you're thinking about the circumstances of your life. And I guess I'd also add the fact that it's been a part of political rhetoric for decades where promises are made, vote for me, I'll set you free, right? Vote for us, we'll take care of everything. And now I think that there's a greater hunger for that to be really true through politics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, so I'll just throw out a couple contributing factors. I mean, Vince is honest. Interestingly, politics is where you go for real life to get real things done. There's this concept I write about in my book, The Disappearance of Moral Knowledge, that was really the principal academic topic for Dallas Willard. And real briefly, the disappearance of moral knowledge, Willard argues essentially in the post-World War II era. And by the way, Willard was a professor of philosophy at University of Southern California, a Christian author, teacher as well. And he argues that in the post-World War II period, gatekeepers of knowledge, by which he principally means academia, but also others, believed that and acted as if moral knowledge doesn't have to be religious knowledge. Moral knowledge, knowledge of right and wrong, good and evil, does not qualify as public knowledge, does not qualify as knowledge at all. It is not fit to be taught by teaching institutions. Now, the problem with this is we live in a moral universe, and politics is full of moral decision-making. And so by removing moral knowledge as a category of knowledge, you don't alleviate the need for people to make moral decisions. You just leave people without thinking that the moral decisions they have to make have any basis at all. That leads to a great deal of anxiety and franticness and this treatment of political parties and platforms as a form of scripture, sort of unchanging truth. Now, just the last thing I'd say is, right, this is on its face completely silly. And it's completely silly because if you compare the political party of either platform today with the political party of that, the platform of that party just 8 years ago or 12 years ago, you'll see completely different positions on core issues. And yet, if we treat our politics as this source of knowledge itself, we find ourselves being led in ways that really can't be reconciled with reality, and that can be quite destabilizing.
Right. So, I was talking with someone before this event started, and I think, you're speaking a little bit to this idea that politics has become a narrative or a slate of things that we know we should believe or we think we should believe. Or people are telling us we should believe. And then when you throw in the church and the influence of the church, I think that's even more confusing. And so then the temptation is to say, I'm not getting involved there. Politics is messy. It's decided morals aren't part of the equation. But I know that can't be true. I'm a Christian. So I'm a Christian. I'm not going to participate in politics. How do we push back on that and encourage people who are discouraged to truly seek a place because Jesus cares about this world, and we ought to also?
Well, it's not safe for Christians to engage in politics with their feet planted in politics, but there are tremendous possibilities for blessing when Christians engage in politics with their feet planted in the gospel. And so, like, the challenge here is it's quite something to see folks who don't have formal political responsibility outside being a citizen, who sort of force on themselves the logic of a political strategist. So they'll say, I know that the person I was talking with had a good point to make, but I couldn't concede that because it would really hurt my side. And it's just like you're in a diner. Like, what are you talking about? No, you're not on CNN. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? And so you impose on yourself the logic of a politics that actually makes us so much less than we ought to be. And so there's so much to say here, but that would just be the, you don't need to submit to the broken, toxic logic of our politics. We can actually operate in a different way, and that will actually help our politicians. I mean, this is one of the things we need to see. It's so easy to, those bums in the Beltway, they're all dividing the country, and if only we could do away with those in the state capitol, or though. Let me tell you, I've talked with a lot of them, and right, there's some obfuscation in this. They need to take responsibility for their own role, but so many of them tell me, I wish I didn't have to put these lines in my email. I wish I didn't have to put out advertising like this, but it's what people are demanding. My people actually think I'm not doing my job if I'm not hateful towards the other side, because I must not really believe what I say I believe if I'm not angry and spiteful. Well, that's us. That's the responsibility we put on the politicians, unless we change.
Another thing I would add is getting people to think that politics isn't one about whatever happens in national elections only.
Right.
That phrase, all politics is local. Second, I think there's just the fact that most of what happens in politics is not around 2 or 3 flashpoint issues. There are a lot of things that happen in terms of public policy that are quite boring, procedural, unsexy. I always tell people, if you really want to see how politics works, just go right over to C-SPAN and then watch it for a long time. Yeah, but how many of you, the next thing you're going to do is tell people, do you know what I saw on C-SPAN today? It was so exciting, I couldn't stand it.
Just described my social life in high school, so this is, but maybe that explains some other things about you. Yeah.
Wow, the things discovered at Carver. But I do think that that's important, and also I think, at least for a lot of Bible-believing Christians, it's okay. There was a time when there was a tension about whether you should be involved in politics or not. Then it became an assumption that you had to only vote a particular way if you were going to be involved in politics. And part of the reason for what I was saying earlier is, I'd love to ask all those people, can you tell me what it is you believe as a Christian that's explaining why you think it's okay or not okay? Right. And I think there's that formation question around what's happening to help people to understand, on the one hand, hey, this isn't your primary identity. And then perhaps outside of certain kind of church context, I do understand this unique thing. The United States is very unique in terms of the level of political agency that the citizen has. This is not what most people have had in world history. And so the possibility for the citizen, the kind of power Mike was just describing, okay, think in terms of history, how many countries you can think of, what you learned in the past was what the populace are doing, having that kind of influence on the political leaders. It was not. And so there is a lot of possibility. And I think, again, distancing, stepping back from thinking that it's only about what's happening nationally to just see what's happening locally. Mm-hmm. Pick an issue about one thing that you care about. And then get involved in that thing and write to somebody local, maybe write to your mayor, maybe write to your senator. And do those kinds of things. That kind of political engagement is very different than thinking that you have to be in a screaming match with someone.
And it matters. The
It absolutely
local
matters.
engagement matters. Can you talk about that a little bit? It feels sometimes, that sounds great. Write a letter to your whoever, your school board member, your mayor, your council member. How does that matter and form us in a way to greater engagement?
So I'll follow it up with a question to Michael. One thing I heard you say a couple times is, and so I'm wondering if this is still true. You said that if a congressman or a senator gets a certain number of letters from their constituency about X, then they think, oh, this is really serious. And so does that still hold?
Yeah, that holds, and it's even truer at the local level, to your point. And we're not talking, get together 500 friends. I'm talking you get together a dozen friends and write sincere letters to city council person. I promise you, they have a staffer whose job is to say, we got 12 letters today on this vote. This is really firing people up. Like it's so it makes a significant difference. We all have a friend. I won't name him. One of the more inspiring things that's happened that I've sort of heard is we have a friend who works for. He does development for a major nonprofit that works with businesses, nonprofits. They have a portfolio of hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, all this stuff. That's his day job. He heard about this issue in his local community about a swimming pool. A swimming pool was being built. And he thought this was a really important thing. Whether it would be built, where it was going to be built. And so he, after his job, where he was dealing with all these entrepreneurs, everything, he was going to town hall meetings. And he was meeting with different stakeholders in the community and trying to, and he wasn't someone who had an office. He didn't have, but this is what he did. Yeah. Right, he did exactly right. And so deeply inspiring to me. Also, it's the kind of thing, I think people feel our politics is so toxic. And the more I get involved, the more I will succumb, the more I'm vulnerable to that toxicity. Let me tell you, the people who are most toxic in our politics are not the people who are actually involved in political work in general. Like this is one of the interesting sort of dichotomies here, which is those who are actually in the work, trying to actually get something done, they're the ones who understand, oh, there are people who disagree with me for very good reasons. Oh, this is much more complicated than I thought. It's the people who are participating through politics as a form of entertainment. It's those who say, I'm burnt out from politics. And then you ask them, well, how many doors did you knock on? How many town hall meetings did you attend? They say, oh, none of that, but I did spend 5 hours on Reddit last night. And I think I really made some good art. I think I really laid it into them. That's where much of the toxicity is coming from. Not from people who are trying to get a pool built.
Right. I'm acutely aware that this position I'm sitting in is dangerous because I could say something and, be canceled right away. However, I would like to ask how we might engage well with media and social media in an era where entertainment is often the priority over facts, truth, reporting, and especially in this, I'm sort of tempted, I had a sort of milestone birthday this year, and I'm tempted to say, back in the day, when I was growing up, all these things, but it does feel like quite a different situation right now that is very hard to parse truth and constructivity. So how might Christians engage well with the media and social media, especially in this area of politics?
I think one of the things is to ask, okay, how does the media function? So if the media is, for example, a commercial enterprise, right, then you have to remember that a lot of the media is a commercial enterprise. So, is the goal really to communicate to you in a way that is going to help you to really be in depth on the issues? That's why you go to the town halls. That's why you actually try to contact the people that are the office holders to find out about these issues. But we, in this multi-channel society that we're in, and in a time when at least the perception of American life is less certain that you're going to be able to have the American dream like you thought you might have whenever back when was. It's easier for someone who is a great communicator and a great communicator in a commercial medium to communicate to you, I'll tell you what the problem is, I'll give you the answer, and this is all you need to know, just believe me. Yeah. And so I think that's part of the problem. In terms of that engagement itself, what I would say is, one, understand what that medium is. In terms of a lot of the social media, I think the question is, are you willing to understand that, one, most of the toxic people that are on social media, it's not most of them, but they're frequent and loud, metaphorically speaking.
Yep. Squeaky wheel.
Yeah, and then second, that if you're going to participate at all, then be committed to being a voice that's going to put something positive into the conversation, or to ask a question with integrity. And also to not expect that, okay, is your goal to doing that because you want to go viral? Right. Or is your goal because you just want to, through that medium, help to add to a constructive conversation? Is that your goal, or is your goal just to kind of get caught up in the fray and think about owning this team or owning that team or whatever it is? Because there's a certain
clicks or likes,
there's a certain there's a certain reward to that people feel if they do that. But at least for the Christian, are you thinking about, Michael said, if politics is, for example, a way of loving neighbor, is there a way in my communication as I participate in this thing, this is another opportunity for me to love my neighbors? Why? By showing that I care about people, and maybe particularly showing that I care about people who I do not agree with. Right. But I care about them as human beings. Yep. I don't want terrible things to happen to their families. I don't want terrible things to happen to them. If they're sick, I hope that they're being cared for. Am I willing to be that kind of person? And so, it sounds so basic, but is there a commitment to neighbor love in one's engagement in the social media?
Great.
I'll just, there are things that we could talk about in terms of like news media hygiene and cultivating your sources of information. But I'd say the spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude, I think, are essential spiritual disciplines for our time. I don't think we realize how much our imagination is limited and directed by the fact that we just have this IV drip constantly of billions and billions of dollars directed towards your attention, getting it, keeping it. And in solitude, you can discover that some of the things that you are being told about people who are different than you, people with different beliefs than you, may not actually be what's at the core of reality. You may also discover that you have a soul that is not just an amalgamation of all the various inputs that are vying for your attention, that you actually aren't justified by your political opinions. But if we're not silent, and if we're not in solitude enough to not live off of the sustenance of others' opinions of us, we may never discover that. And much of modern life is about distracting us from the fact that we're more than just what other people say about us and the sort of affirmation we get from gaining others' approval.
Michael talks about this a lot in his book, which I do commend to you, The Spirit of Our Politics. I have it right here, and like I said, it'll be sold out front. But just sort of reminding us, I like this reminder that spiritual disciplines are relevant today. You both in your books talk about influences from theologians, and I'm greatly overmatched, but Michael's book draws heavily on Dallas Willard, who he's already mentioned, and Vince is an expert on Kuyper. And so I'm wondering if each of you might talk just a smidge about those influences in a lay audience way, and tell us how what they said even then applies even now in a world that's very different, both in terms of media and approach, but also politics and 21st century, all the things.
I'm trying to think. A short and concise primer on Abraham Kuyper.
You can do it.
Obscure to some Dutch Calvinist. So the important thing, I think, in terms of Kuyper's influence is, one, he helps us to think about, this is a very important thing, about how to be Christian and that we ought to participate in politics because God cares for the world. God's preserving this world. And so because the world goes on, there's still the opportunity to serve in the world. And you can serve in the world through politics, cultural development, etc. And so there's that piece of it. But also, once you're doing that, this is really important. I think a lot of times when people are thinking about faith and politics, there are two options. Option number one, check out. Arm's length or run for your life, just run away from it. Or two, take over. And that those are really the only two options. And that if you're talking about being Christianly involved in politics, it must mean taking over things. And that's not at all what Kuyper was after. I mean, a way to think about it is that what Christians believe, the way that this would have an influence on the culture, on the politics, the phrase sometimes people use is a leavening influence, like yeast, right? In other words, that is something that is a presence, and that presence is showing up in various spaces, and as that presence is there, then it begins to have an effect. That's very different than talking about taking over. And what that means is that the goal of the Christian in politics is not to turn a society into a church. It is not for pastors to tell you how to run universities, to run political systems or whatever. The people who are formed in the church, as they learn to do, as they use their gifts, talents, abilities, wherever they go, their participation in the world, as those people, you show up remembering you're those people. And it's making a difference in how you're being formative as you have the opportunities to make a difference in those various spaces. That's very different than taking over or just checking out. And to me, that's one of the most, I think, helpful things from Kuyper.
Well, I've said a bit about Willard already, so maybe I'll just offer an idea from Bonhoeffer.
Great. Bonus.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Bonhoeffer has this idea, and he writes about it for like 2.5 pages in his book, Life Together. And I mean, this is connected. I learned about this not because I read Life Together first, but because Dallas Willard talked about Life Together. So, it all comes back to Willard. Bonhoeffer has this idea. He says, Christians never meet one-on-one. Jesus is always present in their midst. He goes before them, he's between them. And he says, because of this, we don't look to enact our agenda on the person we're talking with. We look to Jesus, who mediates our relationship. And we ask Jesus, what are you doing in the life of this person? How are you seeking to move in the life of this person? And he has this amazing line. He says, a Christian will speak more to Christ about a brother than to a brother about Christ. I think that's incredible. And I just think this image of Christ is mediating to be very powerful in a political context. What if Christians, to Vince's point, what if Christians approach politics not as an act of imposition, but in a spirit of loving service, looking to Jesus first before they acted on their fellow citizen? And I think just this image, this vision, could do so much to just remake the sort of typical Christian approach to our political life.
Yeah, that's great. These are great answers. I'm going to ask one more question and then turn to your questions, of which there are currently 38. So, add to the number as you will. As you're both talking, just in that answer and also earlier, I'm just sort of lamenting the division within the church that is precipitated by politics. And thinking quite a bit about the unity in the church and wondering, do we all need to be on the same political party? If we're truly seeking Jesus in silence and solitude and considering our controlling beliefs and really trying to put everything right, and we want to be loving our neighbors and all the things, does that mean that we're all going to be one happy party? Talk a little bit about how we divide, sort of bridge these gaps.
So,
And I'm going to read, so I'm not being rude.
I invited Mike to campus to speak. We went out to dinner. I don't know if you remember this. And I told Mike that I'm an independent, right? Which means that, in Illinois, I observe primaries. And I remember he was basically saying, why don't you choose a team, is what he said. I don't remember what I know. That's Bacote paraphrase of Weir. But he was asking, he wasn't saying join us, join my team. He was just raising the question about being involved in a party at all. And I just that's just to the point, right? That he wasn't talking about. It's so important that you're with us because the universe will go into a black hole if you don't. So I just think that's part of it. And another thing that I would add about this is we'd only all be in one party if we only have the same experiences and are the same people. Because if I ask you to define what justice is, and then if I ask you to tell me what's the first thing you think about when you think about justice, chances are, if there were thought balloons that I could see, I can't. But if I could, they would not be the same. And chances are those are the things that orient people to sometimes being in one party rather than another. So I've sometimes said in my classes, I said, some Christians, because they care about justice, they're Democrats. Why? Because Democrats have at least given more lip service to race and done something about race. I said, some Christians when they think about justice, they're Republicans because they're thinking about the pro-life issue, right? And the point isn't, okay, which one of these issues is better. It's there are different reasons why those issues are important to people. And so, there's all kinds of things, like that suitcase metaphor I was talking about. What happened in your family? Who helped your family? Who ignored your family? What party never says anything about your neighborhood? I mean, all those types of things determine why people might be a Republican, a Democrat, Green Party, some other thing. And so I think it's important for us just to understand so much informs why people might make those choices.
Yeah, well, this will be good for the Q&A because it opens up quite a bit.
Great.
Christian unity will not look like political uniformity, but spiritual integrity.
Say that again.
Christian unity will not look like political uniformity, but spiritual integrity.
So good.
C.S. Lewis has this essay, Meditations on the Third Commandment, and I was once speaking about this essay, this little-known essay. I was once speaking about it at Cambridge, and referred to this little-known essay, and they said, no, there are no little-known C.S. Lewis essays at Cambridge. And I was like, okay, touche. But in this essay, he's considering the creation of a Christian political party in Britain, like there are across Europe and many other places around the world. And he says, the temptation when you combine faith and politics is to proclaim God hath said when he hasn't spoken, to use God's name in vain. So he says, even if you found a political party and what you take to be the most unassailable Christian position, he says, the problem is when you're a legislator, you don't get to just focus on the one issue. So you have that mantle of a Christian political party, but you're using it to vote on tax rates and zoning regulations. Swimming pools. And so this temptation to proclaim God hath said when he hasn't spoken is something we need to be really careful about. And it's part of what I'm afraid happens when we say, if you're not on my team, you must not be. Well, yeah, we ought to fear God a bit more than to be so willing to make claims like that.
Okay, I'm turning to your questions. And, we're just going to go for it, right? Christian nationalism. Could someone define it and talk about whether that, the specific question submitted was, is that idolatry? Tell us about Christian nationalism. Let's come up with a definition and talk about where we might see that and harm, and maybe some good if there is any. I just tilted my, you know what I think now. Okay, anyway, I'm not the expert.
Yeah. So I think it's trying to get at a real thing. I do think the discourse around the subject is one that is quite manipulative, one that tries to end a conversation before it starts. And I think we just need to be really, really careful around this conversation. Because how it's being used by some is to basically just as a way to preemptively exclude Christian expressions that they just don't like. But instead of having to talk about it on its merits, that's Christian nationalism. Now, I think if you read some of the best academics, and if you read their actual academic work, not the tweets, not the articles that summarize, but the actual academic work, I think there's real merit in some of it, especially depending on the academic. And I think at its most sort of like Christian nationalism is a view that the government should privilege Christianity to the detriment of all else. And Christianity should be a particular articulation of Christianity should be the debate ender. That there should be a sort of reigning dogma that is inherently political. Now, I think that conflation of Christian dogma and politics, like they're already theological issues. Here's just, and I'm interested in what Vince has to say. I think the major error that is made in these conversations is that for too long, Christians have sought special status in this country while trying to avoid special responsibility. But Christians ought to be looking for responsibility, sacrifice, and doing away with status, right? That's the inversion of the kingdom. But so much of these debates are really identity debates. We want a recognition without the service. And I'm saying, no, what Christian public participation ought to look like is the service without the need for recognition.
No, I think I'd agree with that. I think it's interesting to think that, I really appreciate you saying that. I think it is unfortunate that some of the discourse around Christian nationalism has been a conversation stopper. It's a way to put an accusation on people. Most of the people that get the label of Christian nationalists put in them are not thinking, okay, America must specifically be a nation that is literally I mean, because you ask people, what does it mean for America to be a Christian nation? You're going to get a lot of different answers. But specifically, where the government privileges us, where we're supposed to be in charge of everything, the strongest forms where particular traditions are running everything. Like if you're a Catholic integralist, then Catholic social teaching is running society. I mean, that's going to be a kind of Christian nationalism, and you're closely identifying the aims of God's kingdom with what's happening with that particular country. And so there are some people, I think, who fit that category. I think to what you're saying about people wanting status, it's a way of another way of thinking about it is to say that as the countries become more pluralistic,
Right. Yeah.
combined with Christians not really being involved in being culturally formative,
Right.
then things that you could take for granted with a kind of generic Christian way of navigating things in the world that's not the only game in town anymore. And so when you're losing that kind of privileged status, it makes some people nervous. Right, and it's not something you have to work for, it's something you can take for granted. And so some people are wanting to say, well, what about my country, et cetera. And so I think some people then, for them to get it back, they have this idea about what they want the country to be. Now, there are other people, of course, who do think that about the United States being a specific nation that's kind of like a new Israel, et cetera. To which, respectfully, I just like to tell people that the Bible says nothing about countries this side of the Atlantic, except for the fact that we're like the nations and the ends of the earth. That's it. Right. Okay, so we are not the center of salvation history. Are we an exceptional country in certain ways? We are, because Catholics wouldn't kill Protestants and all those kinds of things. But the idea that we're somehow the centerpiece of everything is really an interesting reading of the Bible, I guess, is the best thing to say about that. And I guess I would also say, I think this is just something to observe about what some people will say if some are Christian nationalists or some have some of that association. There's this way of thinking about the United States and thinking now we're particularly in trouble. Right. Now, this is what I find hilarious, okay? I find it hilarious when for most of the history of the country, people like myself were either enslaved or living under Jim Crow, and people weren't worrying about then God doing something to the country because of that, right? We're still here. And God didn't take us out for that kind of massive violation of the second greatest commandment. And so sometimes I want to say, now you're worried? Right. Right. I just think it's really important to say that, right? Because it tells you about what's rising to the top, what's important, what signals for you that things are going wrong. Different things, rise to the top, and now we're in a crisis mode because of a particular thing happening. You take a survey, you won't get all the same answers on that. So I think, it's really important that I think if people are going to use the label Christian nationalism, to get back to that just for a second, I think it's important to not accuse people, but to ask people, hey, tell me more about what you're thinking or what you're concerned about and what you hope to happen in the country. And then you have to ask them, and what do you hope for people who do not share your views?
Right. Yeah, right. I mean, I just think some of these metrics and these ways of trying to define Christian nationalism. So, for instance, one organization uses a 5-part question. One of the questions is, do you believe the Bible should influence public policy? And there's a real problem with that. 85% of black Protestants think that the Bible should inform public policy. Now, the thing that they do is they say, well, we're not talking about that. Well, then talk about what you're talking about, not put the Bible in the middle of this, because you're clearly not talking about that. Second thing I'd say is just to build on, it's why I don't like the work that the term post-Christian does, particularly within the church, but also the message it sends externally, in part because of exactly what you just raised. If we're post-Christian now, at what dates were we Christian? And then that could, to your point, lead to some pretty interesting assumptions about the nature of society.
Well, to that point, one of my historian colleagues said if you actually, like when people think about what we were in the past, people might assume, for example, that in the 19th century, most people were going to church. Mm-mm. It was less than 30%. Mm. So the assumption that we were so Christian, it's like, well, I mean, the ideas, or at least, sort of the certain ideas, right. but in terms of massive church attendance, that wasn't what was happening.
Okay, we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Maybe it will be briefer. We'll see. So, some of you know me. You're thinking
we're talking about two of the things you're not supposed to ever talk about: religion and politics. So here we are. Someone asked a good question, and as I think about Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, we all have families, and we don't all have the same beliefs. We have friends that don't all have the same beliefs. Can you give some really practical applications of how we might interact with people that we love, some of whom love Jesus or claim to, and are convicted of something radically different than we are, and maybe even use scripture to bolster their point in a kind of a, a way that is not always appreciated.
So there's this fella, John Anazu.
Yes.
No. Here's the thing. So it's now commonplace. Around Thanksgiving, these op-eds will come out. Don't let your uncle eat his mashed potatoes until you make sure to hold him accountable for his bad political views. My question to these is always, like, is your uncle a sitting United States senator? And if so, then I think a good argument could be, you better not let your uncle, Senator so-and-so, hey, what was up with that vote? Like, then I think like the moral, but I think for most of us, maybe your primary moral responsibility in that context is not to correct or win a political argument. I mean, it kind of goes back to my point about, I think we wrongly situate the stakes in situations like these and wrongly configure what our moral responsibility to the person is. Now, just to speak, sometimes we don't bring up the conversation comes to us. And it really depends on the relationship you have with the person. I do think that there are relationships in our lives where you come to an understanding, and you need to say, look, I am not in relationship with you because of your political views. I don't desire. I'm not driving home after we're together thinking, oh, maybe just 2-3 more conversations and they'll come to view things the right way, my way. But you say, I don't know if we keep centering political disagreement in the context of our relationship. I don't know how that relationship's gonna hold together. There are some people in your life that you just need to say, look, it's best if we don't talk about these issues, and I think that's okay.
Right, and I think to the point of sometimes people say don't have those conversations. The more that people inhabit that, the more they have a conspiracy of silence that will have them lead to a disposition about the other people, because you think you know what other people think, and you've never asked them what they think. And I think so. Including what Michael says about, I mean, the kinds of relationships you have. Are there conversations where somebody disagrees with you, but you can just ask them about them, ask them about themselves, ask them to tell you the story, find out, try to find a way to maybe for them to unveil what their fear is, what made them mad, how they felt betrayed by something, or what maybe fired them up in a particular way. And none of that has to mean that you buy what they're selling, okay? But you may or you may not. But you're basically trying to show, hey, I just want to know you.
Right. Yes.
Right. And certainly,
I
think. What's that?
I want to love my neighbor.
Exactly. And another thing I think about is this. So if you think about these families, these relatives, do you want when this person's near the end of their life to not be able to have a conversation with this person because of something that is not as important as this relationship that you have with that person? And I think that it's important for us to think about, okay, what do I care about this person? Do I love this person? What was my relationship like with this person before something maybe became a flashpoint? Do I value this? And do I want to keep valuing that? I think it's important for us to think about how to do that. Sometimes that may mean the way you value it is you say, now's not the time to bring up those topics, but there are a lot of other things to talk about.
Okay, last question. Someone points out correctly that both of you work with younger people quite a bit. And so the question has to do with, in what ways are you hopeful for our future based on your interactions with younger people? And Are there other ways that you are potentially concerned with the way they consider politics or sort of public life?
The only concern that I would really have is, at least in terms of what I'm seeing right now, like among this particular set of students, is the potential for apathy. In other words, cynicism. What's the use? Because then people are forgetting what I was saying earlier about the fact that you realize that you're in a country where whatever madness we have, you have so much political opportunity, so much political agency, and none of it requires you to be an insufferable person. And none of it requires you being an expert about everything. It's just an opportunity to think about, is there something that I care about where I want to seek the good of other people? And is there something that I can care about there? So I think there needs to be a kind of re-enchantment about the possibilities politically. And again, none of that means that it has to be some kind of great narrative. And it doesn't need to be something that you're reporting on social media or whatever. You don't have to narrate it at all. It can be quite behind the scenes. And I do think being in the United States where we reward big things, spectacular things, that can maybe make people think, if it's not going to be big and spectacular, is it worth the time? To which I would say, I think something I'm hopeful about is I do get a sense that it's possible to not re-enchant, but also to help people to have a vision that's longer than just the next 4 years or the next 8 years, et cetera. And part of that, again, means, am I thinking about people besides myself? And I'm thinking about, the way Mako Fujimura puts it, says, instead of having a 5-year vision, have you thought about having a 5,000-year vision? Am I thinking about trying to have a bigger vision about what we could be? I do sense that there's a possibility to help people to do that, because I think there's more fear and cynicism, but not necessarily hopelessness, right, but a fear and cynicism that leads to the apathy. So there's the opportunity, I think, to reacquaint people with more hopeful possibilities.
Good. So you talked a little bit about apathy. Michael, tell us a little bit about the engaged young people that you are involved with. You've got maybe the top sliver of people who want to be involved in politics, believers, young people. Where are you hopeful? What do you see in them?
I see a tremendous amount of earnestness. I see people with their hearts on fire for Jesus. And I think the challenge is how that develops or devolves over time.
Develop or devolve, okay.
So I've been in Washington for some time now, and people come to a place like DC with their hearts on fire for Jesus. They feel called to combat human trafficking or fight global poverty. One of the things that can happen, though, is the longer you spend working on an issue, working in a space, sometimes in Christian community, they don't understand the work you're doing. But in your political community, they don't understand your faith. But at least you're getting your work affirmed. And if work is at the center of your life, then there is a kind of gravitational pull that can happen. And so, like, we run a young professionals program. If you want to participate in that program, you need to be involved in the local church. I've just found it to be essential over time. People think, well, I'm like, I work at a Christian organization. I'm doing like Christian things all the time. No, but you need to be in Christian community where the people in your church don't care about what you're doing Monday through Friday. They care about how you serve coffee, and they care about how you stack up chairs after the service. They care about how you are with their kids. You need to have other sources of meaning other than how important this thing that God has placed on my heart is. And so that's the risk, is that over time there's this disappointment with things not moving fast enough, and there's a doubling down on the technique of politics. But the possibility is, if you could be grounded in a lasting, real, worthy source of meaning and stay engaged in the work over the long haul, then there's amazing potential for that. And that's what we're trying to cultivate, and that's what I see.
Planting your feet in the gospel, not in politics, yeah. I am going to wrap us up now, which is sad, I know. But I would like to commend these books to you. Vince's is excellent. It's a little bit shorter. The Political Disciple.
You can read it in 2 hours or less.
Let me tell you, both of these are very accessible, so don't be intimidated. But I just want to close with one quote from each of them, and then one scripture passage as we go away from here tonight. Vince writes in his book, ultimately, the central question is one about what it means to live out a public Christ-likeness that exhibits equal care for people as well as issues. And Michael said recently in an email this week, our politics and public life need leaders who are deeply formed by the way and the life of Jesus. I thought those were both really powerful. And as I was thinking about this conversation, and I don't know, just this temptation to sort of cut and run, like, I don't want to deal with this, right? Politics is messy. I'm just remembering Jeremiah 29:7. You know, Jeremiah 29 gets a lot of press at graduation for all kinds of, good reasons. But, verse 7 says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I think we all can be inspired by that, by these two gentlemen who shared with us tonight. Would you join me in thanking them for being here? All right, we'll dismiss now, and if you would, let them get out to the front so they can get to their book signing tables, and then you can stop by and say hello. Thank you.